He told her she was nobody. 3 words, one night, and she vanished. But 8 years later, fate dragged her back, soaking wet, trembling in the storm, holding a little boy in her arms. And when that child looked up, the crime lord saw his own eyes staring back. A son he never knew existed. A secret she kept for 8 years. A choice that will destroy him, or save him. This is the story of the man who had everything, except the family he threw away. Stay until the end. This will break you. The rain fell like a punishment. It crashed against the marble steps of the Shangri-La Hotel in downtown Chicago, turning the city into a blur of neon and shadows. Inside, the private dining room on the penthouse floor was silent except for the soft clink of crystal and the low hum of power. Min-Jun Kim sat at the head of the long table, his dark suit sharp as a blade, his presence a warning. At 32, he was the youngest head of the Korean underground syndicate in America, a man whose name made politicians sweat and rival families disappear. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. Across from him, 6 men in tailored black waited for orders. They knew better than to speak first. Min-Jun's fingers drummed once against the glass of whiskey in his hand. Once was enough. The shipment arrives Thursday, he said, his voice low and final. No delays, no mistakes. Yes, sir. Dismissed. They rose like shadows and left without sound. Alone now, Min-Jun stared at the rain beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city looked small from up here, fragile, like everything else. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Mr. Kim, a voice said from the doorway. Your guest has arrived. He turned his head slightly, enough to acknowledge, not enough to care. But then she walked in, and the air changed. Her name was Lila, 24 years old, dark skin glowing against the white uniform of the hotel staff, eyes that held something Min-Jun hadn't seen in years, defiance mixed with exhaustion. She carried a tray of appetizers with the grace of someone who'd learned to disappear into rooms like this. But she didn't disappear to him. She set the tray down without a word, her movements careful, professional. Min-Jun watched her. You're new, he said. It wasn't a question. Lila glanced up briefly, meeting his gaze for just a second before looking away. I started last week. You don't belong here. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Look at me. Slowly, reluctantly, she did. Min-Jun leaned back in his chair, studying her like she was a puzzle he didn't have time to solve but couldn't ignore. What's your name? Lila. Lila, he repeated, tasting the sound. You're too smart to be serving drinks. She blinked, surprised. Then something flickered in her expression. Pride, maybe. Or anger. I'm working 2 jobs to finish nursing school, she said quietly. This pays better than the diner. Min-Jun's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. Ambition. Survival, she corrected. For a moment, they looked at each other. Him, a king made of ice and violence. Her, a woman carved from resilience and hope. Then she turned to leave. Wait. Lila stopped, her hand on the doorframe. Come back when your shift ends, Min-Jun said. I want to talk to you. She looked over her shoulder, confusion crossing her face. Why? Because I said so. It should have sounded cold. It should have felt like a threat. But something in his voice was different. Softer, almost, curious. Lila hesitated, then nodded once and left. Min-Jun watched her go, his whiskey forgotten. He didn't know it yet. But that moment, that small, impossible moment, would be the beginning of everything. 3 months later. They were never supposed to happen. But they did. Late nights became conversations. Conversations became confessions. And confessions became the kind of intimacy that felt like falling and flying at the same time. Lila learned that Min-Jun's coldness was armor. That beneath the empire and the violence, there was a man who'd been alone for so long he'd forgotten what warmth felt like. Min-Jun learned that Lila's strength wasn't loud. It was quiet, steady, unbreakable. She didn't fear him, she saw him, and that terrified him. Because men like him didn't get happy endings. They got empires. They got power. They got fear. But not love. Never love. The night it ended, the rain was falling again. Lila stood in Minjun's penthouse, her heart pounding, her hands trembling as she held the small white stick in her palm. Positive. She was pregnant. For weeks she'd been scared to tell him, scared of what it meant, scared of what he'd say. But tonight, she decided she had to. "Minjun?" she whispered as he walked through the door, exhaustion etched into his face from another late meeting with the families. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "What is it?" She stepped forward, her voice shaking. "I need to tell you something." "Then tell me." Lila took a breath. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was deafening. Minjun's face didn't change. He didn't move. He just stared at her like she'd spoken a language he didn't understand. "Say something," she whispered. "You're pregnant," he repeated slowly. "Yes. With my child." "Yes." His jaw clenched, his hands curled into fists at his sides. And then he said the words that would haunt her for 8 years. "You think this changes anything?" Lila's breath caught. "You think because you're carrying my child, you suddenly matter?" Minjun's voice was ice. "You're a waitress, Lila, a nobody. You don't belong in my world. You never did." Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "I thought you cared about me." "I don't care about anyone," he said coldly. "That's how I survive." "Then what were we?" "A mistake." The word hit her like a slap. Minjun turned away, his back to her, his voice final. "Get rid of it, or keep it. I don't care. But don't ever come back here." Lila stood frozen, her whole world collapsing. Then she turned and walked out into the rain. And Minjun Kim, the most powerful man in the Korean underground, stood alone in his empire of glass and shadows. He told himself he didn't feel anything. He told himself it was better this way. He was lying. 8 years passed like seasons through a storm. Lila disappeared into a life Minjun would never know. She moved to a small neighborhood on the outskirts of Chicago, far from the glittering towers and dangerous men. She worked doubles at a clinic, finished nursing school, and raised the boy alone. His name was Elijah. He had his father's eyes, dark, sharp, piercing. But he had his mother's heart, warm, curious, kind. Lila never told him about Minjun. She couldn't. How do you explain to a child that his father is a man who chose power over love, that he called you nobody and walked away? So she didn't. She built a world for Elijah made of bedtime stories and morning pancakes, of laughter in the kitchen and homework at the dining table. A world where love was louder than fear. But some nights, when the boy was asleep and the apartment was silent, Lila would sit by the window and wonder, did Minjun ever think of her? Did he ever regret it? She didn't know. And she told herself she didn't care. Minjun Kim's empire had grown. At 40, he was untouchable. The Korean syndicate in America answered to him. Politicians owed him favors. Rival families feared him. His name was whispered in rooms where power lived and died. He had everything, and nothing. His penthouse overlooked the city like a throne above the clouds. His closets held suits worth more than most people's cars. His schedule was filled with meetings, negotiations, deals signed in blood and ink. But the silence was louder now. He didn't know why. Late at night, when the city slept and his guards stood watch outside, Minjun would pour himself a drink and stare at the rain. And sometimes, just sometimes, he'd remember her. Lila, the woman with eyes that saw through him. The woman he'd destroyed with 3 words. He told himself it was weakness to think of her. He told himself he'd made the right choice. But the whiskey tasted like regret. The night of the storm. It started with lightning. The sky cracked open over Chicago, turning the streets into rivers and the air into static. Thunder shook the buildings. Rain fell like the world was ending. Minjun was in the back of his black SUV, returning from a meeting at the docks. His driver navigated the flooded streets carefully. the windshield wipers working furiously against the downpour. "Sir, we should wait it out," his bodyguard said from the passenger seat. "Keep driving," Min-jun replied, his voice flat. They turned onto a side street near the old district, an area Min-jun rarely visited. The headlights cut through the rain, illuminating the empty road ahead. And then the driver slammed on the brakes. "What the—" Min-jun looked up. A woman stood in the middle of the street, soaked to the bone, her arms wrapped around a small figure. A child. The driver honked, but she didn't move. She just stood there, trembling, her face pale and desperate. "Sir?" the bodyguard asked, his hand moving instinctively toward his concealed weapon. Min-jun's eyes narrowed. Something about her was familiar. "Get out," he ordered. "Check on her." The bodyguard hesitated, then opened the door, rain immediately soaking his suit as he stepped out. But Min-jun didn't wait. He opened his own door and stepped into the storm. The rain hit him like a wall, cold and violent. He walked toward the woman, his polished shoes splashing through the water, his dark coat already drenched. "Move out of the road," he called over the thunder. The woman looked up, and Min-jun froze. No, it can't be. But it was. Lila. She looked different, older, thinner, exhaustion carved into her face like scars. But it was her, those eyes, that defiance. She stared at him, recognition flashing across her expression, followed by something darker. Fear. "Lila," Min-jun said, his voice barely audible over the storm. She didn't answer. She just held the boy tighter, her body shaking. Min-jun stepped closer, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. And then he looked down at the child in her arms. A boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old. Soaked, shivering, clinging to his mother like she was the only solid thing in the world. The boy lifted his head and looked directly at Min-jun. Time stopped, because the child had his eyes. Not similar, not kind of like, exactly like his. Dark, sharp, unmistakable. Min-jun's breath caught. "No." "Who is this?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Lila's jaw clenched. She didn't answer. "Lila," Min-jun said again, stepping closer. "Who is this boy?" She met his gaze, and in her eyes he saw 8 years of pain, anger, and survival. "His name is Elijah," she said quietly, "and he's your son." The words hit him like lightning. Min-jun stared at her, then at the boy, his mind racing. A son. He had a son. For 8 years, this child had existed without him. For 8 years, Lila had raised him alone. And Min-jun had never known. "You!" His voice was rough, broken. "You didn't tell me." "You told me I was nobody," Lila said, her voice shaking with fury. "You told me to get rid of it. So I did what I had to. I disappeared. And I raised him alone." Elijah looked between them, confused and scared. "Mom?" he whispered. Lila's expression softened immediately. "It's okay, baby. We're okay." But they weren't. Because Min-jun Kim, the man who'd built an empire on control, was staring at the boy with his eyes and feeling something he'd never felt before. Regret. Not the kind that whispered in the dark, the kind that screamed. "Get in the car," he said. Lila shook her head. "No. You're soaked. The boy is freezing. Get in the car." "I don't need your help." "Lila," Min-jun said, his voice dropping to something quieter, more dangerous. "I'm not asking." She glared at him, her whole body tense. But Elijah was shivering violently now, his lips turning blue. And Lila knew she didn't have a choice. "Fine," she whispered, "but just for tonight." Min-jun nodded once, then turned and gestured to his bodyguard. They climbed into the SUV, Lila in the back with Elijah wrapped in a dry coat, Min-jun across from them, watching them like they were ghosts. As the car pulled away from the storm, Min-jun stared at the boy who had his eyes. And for the first time in 8 years, he felt something crack inside him. The penthouse was silent, except for the rain. Min-jun's home looked like it always did. Cold, elegant, untouchable. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the glittering city below. Modern furniture, sharp lines, no warmth. A palace built for a king who lived alone. Lila stood in the middle of the living room, holding Elijah close, her wet clothes dripping onto the marble floor. She hated this place. She hated the memories. Minjun appeared from the hallway, carrying towels and a set of dry clothes. He set them on the couch without a word, then stepped back, his hands sliding into his pockets. "Bathroom's down the hall," he said quietly. "Get the boy warm." Lila didn't move. She just stared at him, her eyes burning with anger and exhaustion. "Why did you bring us here?" she asked. "Because you were standing in the middle of a storm." "I've been standing in storms for 8 years, Lila shot back. "I didn't need you then. I don't need you now." Minjun's jaw tightened. "You're still as stubborn as I remember. And you're still as cold." Elijah shifted in her arms, his small voice breaking through the tension. "Mom, I'm cold." Lila's expression softened immediately. "Okay, baby, let's get you warmed up." She carried him toward the bathroom, leaving Minjun standing alone in the living room. He stood there for a long time, staring at the space where she'd been.
Wait, if you're married or in a relationship, this message is for you. Do you feel like he doesn't really see you anymore? Like no matter what you do, he's distant, distracted. Almost like you're strangers under the same roof? The more time passes, the colder it feels. The laughter, the closeness, it's fading. And deep down you're scared. Scared that the connection you once had is slipping away. But it doesn't have to be this way. There is a path to being noticed, to being desired, to feeling close again. Scan the QR code now and take the first step. Don't wait. This moment, it's yours if you act.
Then he turned and poured himself a drink. 20 minutes later, Elijah sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket, his dark hair still damp, his eyes wide as he looked around the massive apartment. "Is this your house?" he asked Minjun quietly. Minjun, sitting across from him in the armchair, nodded once. "Yes. It's really big." "It is." Elijah tilted his head, studying him with the kind of unfiltered curiosity only children have. "Are you a businessman?" Minjun's lips curved slightly. "Something like that." "Mom says businessmen work a lot." "Your mother's right. Do you have kids?" The question hit harder than it should have. Minjun's gaze lingered on the boy, on the sharp lines of his face, the dark eyes, the quiet intelligence already forming in someone so young. "I do now," he said softly. Elijah frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Before Minjun could answer, Lila emerged from the hallway, dressed in dry clothes that were too big for her. One of Minjun's shirts and sweatpants. Her hair was pulled back, her face bare. She looked younger, softer. And for a moment, Minjun couldn't breathe. "Elijah, come here," Lila said gently. The boy climbed off the couch and ran to her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Lila looked at Minjun, her expression guarded. "We'll leave in the morning. You'll stay as long as you need to. We don't need anything from you." Minjun stood, crossing the room until he was just a few feet away. His voice was low, controlled. "He's my son." "He's my son," Lila corrected, her voice sharp. "I'm the one who stayed up all night when he had a fever. I'm the one who taught him to read. I'm the one who held him when he asked why he didn't have a father." Minjun's hands curled into fists. "Because you didn't tell me. You told me to get rid of him." Lila's voice broke, raw with pain. "You called me nobody. What was I supposed to do? Come crawling back?" "Yes," Minjun said, his voice rough. "You should have told me." "Why?" Lila laughed bitterly. "So you could reject him too?" "I would never." "You already did," Lila whispered. "The moment you rejected me, you rejected him." The silence that followed was suffocating. Elijah looked between them, his small face filled with confusion and fear. "Mom?" he whispered. "Are you mad at him?" Lila's expression crumbled. She knelt down, pulling Elijah into her arms. "No, baby, I'm not mad. I'm just tired." Minjun watched them, something breaking inside him. He'd destroyed entire families. He'd built an empire on fear. He'd made men beg for mercy. But watching his son cling to a woman he'd once thrown away? That was the first time Minjun Kim felt powerless. Late that night, Elijah was asleep in the guest bedroom, tucked under blankets too expensive for a child who'd never had anything. Lila sat on the couch, staring out at the city lights, her arms wrapped around herself. Minjun stood by the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. "I didn't know," he said quietly. Lila didn't look at him. Would it have mattered? Yes. Liar. Minjun turned to face her. "I'm not lying." "You told me I was nobody," Lila said, her voice trembling. "You told me to disappear. So I did. I built a life for him. A good life. Without you. I was wrong." Lila finally looked at him, tears shining in her eyes. "You think saying you were wrong fixes 8 years?" "No," Minjun admitted, "but I'm saying it anyway." She laughed bitterly. "Why now? Because you saw him? Because he has your eyes?" "Because I spent 8 years trying to forget you," Minjun said, his voice rough. "And I couldn't." Leela's breath caught. He crossed the room, stopping just in front of her, his dark eyes locked on hers. "I told myself I didn't need anyone," he said quietly, "that I was better alone. But I was wrong. I've been wrong every day since you walked out that door. Minjun." "I don't deserve him," he whispered. "I don't deserve you. But if you let me, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to." Lila stared at him, her heart breaking and healing at the same time. "You hurt me," she whispered. "I know. You broke me. I know. And now you want to be his father?" Minjun's jaw clenched. "Yes. Why should I believe you won't walk away again?" "Because I've lived without you," Minjun said, his voice cracking. "And it's the only thing that's ever scared me." Tears spilled down Lila's cheeks. And for the first time in 8 years, she let herself hope. But hope is dangerous, because some lines can't be uncrossed, and some choices cost everything. Morning came too soon. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the penthouse into gold. Elijah woke first, padding barefoot into the living room with the blanket still wrapped around his shoulders. Minjun was already awake, sitting at the dining table with a laptop open and a cup of black coffee growing cold beside him. He looked up when he heard the small footsteps. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Father and son. Strangers. "Good morning," Minjun said quietly. Elijah nodded, shy. "Morning. Are you hungry?" The boy hesitated, then nodded again. Minjun closed the laptop and stood. "Come with me." They walked into the kitchen together, a space so pristine it looked like no one had ever cooked in it. Because no one had. Minjun didn't cook. He had chefs, assistants, people who handled things like food. But this morning, those people weren't here. It was just him and the boy. Minjun opened the refrigerator, staring at its contents like they were written in a foreign language. Eggs, milk, bread, fruit. Simple things. Things he hadn't touched in years. "Do you like pancakes?" he asked. Elijah's eyes lit up. "Mom makes the best pancakes." Minjun's chest tightened. "I'm not as good as your mother." "That's okay," Elijah said softly. "You can try." So he did. Minjun Kim, crime lord, underground king, man who'd never failed at anything, struggled to make pancakes for his 7-year-old son. He burned the first batch. The second was too thin. The third was lopsided. But Elijah sat at the counter, watching with wide eyes, and when Minjun finally slid a plate in front of him, the boy smiled. "Thank you," Elijah said. And Minjun realized he'd never heard anything more important. Lila found them like that. Her son eating pancakes. Minjun standing awkwardly by the stove, flour on his expensive shirt, something unreadable in his eyes. She stopped in the doorway, her heart doing something dangerous. "Mom!" Elijah called, his mouth full. "He made pancakes!" Lila forced a smile. "I can see that." Minjun looked at her, and for a second the air between them was heavy with all the things they hadn't said. Then his phone buzzed on the counter. The moment shattered. Minjun glanced at the screen, his expression hardening. "I have to take this." He stepped out onto the balcony, his voice dropping into the cold, commanding tone Lila remembered too well. She sat down next to Elijah, brushing his hair back. "How'd you sleep, baby?" "Good," Elijah said, then leaned closer, whispering, "Mom, is he my dad?" Lila's breath caught. She'd known this was coming. She just hadn't known it would hurt this much. "Yes," she whispered. "He is." Elijah's eyes widened. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because," Lila's voice broke, "because it's complicated." "Do you hate him?" "No," Lila said honestly. "I don't hate him." "Does he hate us?" Lila pulled him close, her heart breaking. "No, baby. He doesn't hate us." "Then why didn't he come find us?" Lila closed her eyes, fighting tears. "Because sometimes adults make mistakes. Big ones." Elijah was quiet for a long moment. Then he whispered, "Do you think he wants to be my dad now?" Before Lila could answer, Minjun stepped back inside, his face grim. "We need to talk," he said. Lila sent Elijah to watch TV in the guest room, then followed Minjun into his office, a space as cold and controlled as the rest of his life. He closed the door behind them. "What's going on?" Lila asked. Minjun turned to face her, his jaw tight. "The families know about you." Lila's blood ran cold. "What?" "Last night, when I brought you here, we were seen. Word travels fast in my world." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration bleeding through his control. "They know about the boy." "They know about Elijah?" Lila's voice rose. "What does that mean?" "It means you're vulnerable," Minjun said quietly. "It means he's vulnerable. Because of you." "Yes," Lila laughed bitterly. "Of course. I should have known. The moment you came back into our lives, everything got dangerous." "Lila." "No," she cut him off. "This is exactly why I stayed away. You live in a world of violence and power. I built a safe life for him. And now, because of one night, because you found us in that storm, everything's at risk." Minjun stepped closer, his voice low and intense. "I won't let anything happen to him." "You can't promise that." "I can," Minjun said, his eyes burning. "And I will." "How?" Lila demanded. "How are you going to protect him when your entire world is built on danger?" "By keeping you both here." Lila froze. "What?" "You'll stay here," Minjun said. "Where I can protect you, where my men can protect you. You want us to be prisoners? I want you to be safe." "We were safe before you," Lila shouted. "We were fine. And now?" "You were never safe," Minjun interrupted, his voice cutting. "You think I didn't know where you were? You think I couldn't have found you any time I wanted?" Lila stared at him, shocked. "I knew," Minjun said quietly. "For the last 3 years, I've known exactly where you lived, what clinic you worked at, what school he went to." "You? You were watching us?" "I was protecting you," Minjun corrected. "From a distance. Because I thought that was better. But I was wrong." "You had no right. He's my son." Minjun's voice cracked. "I had every right." The silence was deafening. Lila's hands were shaking. "If you knew, why didn't you come?" Minjun's expression crumbled. "Because I didn't know how. Because I was terrified. Because I told myself you were better off without me." "We were." "Were you?" Minjun asked, stepping closer. "Were you really? Or were you just surviving?" Lila's eyes filled with tears. "That's all I've ever done." "Then let me give you more," Minjun whispered. "Let me give him more." "By trapping us here?" "By giving you a choice," Minjun said. "Stay. Let me protect you. Let me be what I should have been 8 years ago." "And if I say no?" Minjun's jaw clenched. "Then I'll still protect you, but from a distance, and I'll never forgive myself." Lila stared at him, her heart torn between fear and something she didn't want to name. Hope. That afternoon, Elijah sat on the floor of the living room, drawing on paper Minjun's assistant had brought. He drew a house, a tree, 3 stick figures holding hands. Min-jun sat on the couch, pretending to read reports, but really watching the boy. "What are you drawing?" he asked quietly. Elijah looked up. "My family." Min-jun's chest tightened. "Can I see?" Elijah hesitated, then brought the paper over, holding it up proudly. There was a woman with curly hair, Leela, a small boy, Elijah, and a tall figure in black. "That's you," Elijah said, pointing. Min-jun stared at the drawing, something breaking inside him. "Why did you draw me?" he asked, his voice rough. Elijah shrugged. "Because you're my dad." It was the first time anyone had said it out loud. Min-jun's vision blurred. He reached out slowly, carefully, like the boy might disappear if he moved too fast. Can I keep this?" Elijah smiled. "Yeah." And Min-jun Kim, man who'd never cried, not even when his own father died, felt tears burn his eyes. That night, the call came. Min-jun's phone rang at 2 a.m. He answered immediately. "Sir," his second-in-command said, his voice tight, "we have a problem." Min-jun's blood went cold. "What kind of problem?" "The Zhao family. They're demanding a meeting. They say if you don't come alone, they'll consider it an act of war." Min-jun's jaw clenched. The Zhao family, one of the most dangerous rival syndicates in the city. "When?" "Tomorrow night. The old docks." Min-jun closed his eyes. He knew what this was. A test, a threat, a choice. "Tell them I'll be there," he said quietly. He hung up and stood in the darkness of his bedroom, staring at the door that separated him from the guest room where Lila and Elijah slept. He'd spent his whole life building power, but power meant nothing if he couldn't protect the only two people who mattered, and tomorrow night, he'd have to choose. Empire or family? War or heart? The next day passed like a countdown. Min-jun moved through his empire with his usual precision, calls, meetings, orders delivered in that voice that made men obey without question. But inside, he was breaking. Because tonight, he'd walk into a room full of men who wanted him dead. Men who saw his son as a weakness. Men who would use Elijah to destroy him. And for the first time in his life, Min-jun was afraid. Not of dying. He'd never feared death, but of leaving them behind. Lila watched him all day. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands curled into fists when he thought no one was looking, the way he stared at Elijah like he was memorizing him. Something was wrong. That evening, after Elijah went to bed, she found Min-jun on the balcony, staring at the city like it was a kingdom he was about to lose. "Tell me," Lila said quietly. Min-jun didn't turn around. "Tell you what?" "Whatever you're not saying." He was silent for a long moment. Then he finally spoke, his voice low. "I have a meeting tonight." "So?" "A dangerous one." Lila's heart dropped. "How dangerous?" "The kind where I might not come back." "Min-jun." He turned to face her, and she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Fear. "If something happens to me," he said quietly, "there's money, accounts, everything you and Elijah will ever need. My lawyer has instructions." "Stop," Lila interrupted, her voice shaking. "Don't talk like that." "I have to." "No," she said, stepping closer. "You don't. You don't go to that meeting." "I don't have a choice." "Yes, you do." Lila's voice broke. "You walk away. You leave this life. You choose us." Min-jun's jaw clenched. "It's not that simple." "Yes, it is," Lila whispered. "You just have to decide what matters more, your empire or your son." Min-jun stared at her, his hands curling into fists. "You think I don't know that?" "Then prove it," Lila said, tears streaming down her face. "Don't go." "If I don't go, they'll come here," Min-jun said, his voice rough. "They'll come for you, for him, and I won't be able to stop them." "So what do? "We run." Lila froze. "What?" Min-jun stepped closer, his eyes intense. "We disappear. Tonight. I have resources. Safe houses, new identities. We leave everything behind and we go somewhere they'll never find us." "You'd give up everything?" Lila whispered. "I already lost everything once," Min-jun said, his voice cracking. When I lost you. I won't make that mistake again. Lila's breath caught. I'm choosing you, Minjun whispered. Both of you. I'm choosing family. And for the first time in 8 years, Lila believed him. 2 hours later, Minjun moved fast. He called his most trusted men, the ones who'd die for him. He gave orders in code, activated protocols he'd built for exactly this scenario. Money transferred to untraceable accounts, documents forged, escape routes secured. He was dismantling his empire piece by piece, and he didn't hesitate. Lila packed quickly, waking Elijah gently. Baby, we're going on a trip. Now? Elijah rubbed his eyes, confused. Yes, now. It's an adventure. Is he coming? Elijah asked, looking at Minjun. Lila glanced at Minjun, who stood in the doorway, watching them with something raw and vulnerable in his eyes. Yes, Lila whispered. He's coming with us. Elijah smiled sleepily. Good. They were 30 minutes from leaving when Minjun's phone rang. He looked at the screen and his blood turned to ice. Unknown number. He answered. Yes. Mr. Kim, a cold voice said. Change of plans. The meeting's been moved. Where? Your building, lobby, right now. Minjun's heart stopped. What? We're already here, the voice said. And we're not alone. You have 5 minutes. Come down or we come up. The line went dead. Minjun stood frozen, his mind racing. They were here. In his building, where Lila and Elijah were. What's wrong? Lila asked, seeing his face. They're here, Minjun said quietly. What? Downstairs. They want me to come down, alone. Then we run, Lila said desperately. We go now. They'll stop us, Minjun interrupted. They have men at every exit. Then what do we do? Minjun looked at her, then at Elijah, still half asleep on the couch, and he made his choice. I go down, he said. I end this. No. Listen to me, Minjun said, gripping her shoulders. I'm going to walk down there. I'm going to negotiate, and I'm going to make them understand that I'm out. They'll kill you, Lila whispered. Maybe, Minjun admitted. But if I don't go, they'll come up here, and I won't risk that. Lila's hands were shaking. Minjun! He pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. If something happens, you take Elijah and you run. My men will get you out. Promise me. I can't. Promise me, Minjun said, his voice breaking. Lila closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. I promise. Minjun pulled back, then walked to the couch where Elijah was drifting back to sleep. He knelt down, brushing the boy's hair back gently. Hey, he whispered. Elijah's eyes opened. Are you leaving? Just for a little bit. Will you come back? Minjun's throat tightened. I'm going to try. Promise? Minjun looked at his son, his boy, his blood, his second chance, and lied for the first time to someone he loved. I promise. Elijah smiled sleepily and closed his eyes. Minjun stood, his jaw clenched, his hands curled into fists. He looked at Lila one last time. Then he walked out the door. The lobby was empty except for 5 men. They stood in a semicircle, suits dark, expressions colder. At the center was Director Zhao, a man in his 60s with silver hair and eyes like ice. Mr. Kim, Zhao said calmly, thank you for joining us. Minjun stopped 10 feet away, his hands in his pockets, his posture relaxed. But inside, he was a weapon ready to strike. You wanted a meeting, Minjun said. Here I am. Alone, as requested, Zhao observed. Good. That shows respect. What do you want? Zhao smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I want to understand something. You've been the most feared man in this city for a decade. Untouchable. Ruthless. And now, suddenly, you have a woman and a child in your home. Minjun's expression didn't change. My personal life is my business. Not when it makes you weak, Zhao said. I'm not weak. Then prove it, Zhao said quietly. Walk away from them. Tonight. Show us that you're still the man we fear. Minjun's jaw clenched. Or, Zhao continued, Keep them, and accept that you'll be hunted. That every family who's ever wanted your territory will see this as the moment you fell. That boy will grow up with a target on his back. He already has one, Minjun said coldly. Because of who I am. Then give him a chance, Zhao said. Walk away. Let them live normal lives. Be the ghost you've always been. Minjun stared at him. It was the choice he'd been running from his whole life. Power or love, empire or family. And for the first time, the answer was clear. I choose them, Minjun said quietly. Zhao's eyes narrowed. What? I choose my family, Minjun said louder now. I'm out. I'm walking away from all of it. The territory, the power, the empire. It's yours. All of it. Just leave them alone. The room went silent. Zhao studied him for a long moment. Then he laughed. A cold, humorless sound. You think it's that easy? Zhao asked. You think you can just walk away? Yes, Minjun said. Because I'm willing to burn it all down if I have to. Zhao's smile faded. I've built this empire on fear, Minjun continued, his voice low and dangerous. But I'll destroy it with love. And if anyone comes for them, anyone, I'll make sure they regret it. Not as the king of this city, as a father. The words hung in the air like a threat and a promise. Zhao stared at him, then slowly nodded. You're a fool, Zhao said quietly. But a brave one. He turned and walked toward the exit, his men following. At the door, he stopped. Minjun Kim is dead, Zhao said without looking back. The man who walks out of this building tonight is no one. Do you understand? I understand, Minjun said. Zhao nodded once, then he was gone. Minjun stood alone in the empty lobby, his heart pounding, his whole body shaking. He'd done it. He'd walked away. And he was free. 2 years later. The house sat on the edge of a small coastal town in Oregon, miles from the city, from the noise, from the ghosts. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't a penthouse. It was a home. White wooden siding, blue shutters, a wraparound porch with rocking chairs, a yard where wildflowers grew and a tire swing hung from an old oak tree. Inside, the smell of coffee and pancakes filled the kitchen. Minjun, no longer Mr. Kim, no longer the feared crime lord, just a man now, stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with the ease of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. He wore jeans and a simple gray t-shirt. His hair was longer now, softer. His hands, once always clenched into fists, were relaxed, peaceful. Dad! Elijah's voice called from upstairs. I can't find my soccer cleats. Check under your bed, Minjun called back. A moment later, Elijah came thundering down the stairs. 9 years old now, taller, his father's sharp features starting to emerge, but his mother's warmth still shining through. Found them, he announced proudly. Minjun smiled. Good. Now sit down. Breakfast is ready. Elijah climbed onto a chair at the kitchen table just as Lila walked in from the porch, carrying a basket of fresh flowers from the garden. She wore a sundress, her hair pulled back, her face glowing with something Minjun had spent 2 years learning to recognize. Happiness. Morning, she said softly, kissing the top of Elijah's head, then crossing to Minjun. She leaned against him, and he wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. Morning, he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. It was so simple, so ordinary, and it was everything. After breakfast, Elijah ran outside to practice soccer in the yard. Minjun and Lila stood on the porch, watching him through the window. He's getting good, Lila said. He's fast, Minjun agreed. Faster than I was at his age. Lila smiled. He has your focus, your determination. And your heart, Minjun added quietly. They were silent for a moment, just watching their son chase the ball across the grass, laughing when he scored an imaginary goal. Do you ever miss it? Lila asked suddenly. Minjun knew what she meant. The power, the empire, the control. He thought about it for a moment, then shook his head. No, he said honestly. I don't. Not even a little? Not even a little, Minjun repeated, turning to face her. I spent my whole life building something I thought mattered, but it was empty, cold. I was alone in a palace, and I called it power. He took her hands in his eyes intense. This, he said, gesturing to the house, the yard, the boy playing in the sunshine. This is real. This is what matters. I'd give up 100 empires for one morning like this. Lila's eyes filled with tears. You really mean that? I've never meant anything more. She leaned up and kissed him, soft, slow, full of all the years they'd lost and all the years they'd found. When they pulled apart, Minjun rested his forehead against hers. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For giving me a second chance, for letting me be his father, for teaching me what love actually is. Lila smiled through her tears. You earned it. I'm still earning it, Minjun said, every day. And you will be, Lila said gently, for the rest of your life. That's what being a parent is. Minjun smiled. A real smile, the kind he'd never known how to give before. I can live with that. That afternoon, they went to the beach. The Oregon coast was wild and beautiful, waves crashing against black rocks, seagulls crying overhead, the wind carrying the smell of salt and freedom. Elijah ran ahead, his shoes kicked off, his feet splashing through the shallow surf. Minjun and Lila walked hand in hand behind him, their pace slow, unhurried. Dad, Mom, look, Elijah called, holding up a perfect sand dollar. Nice find, Minjun called back. Elijah grinned and kept searching, his small figure a silhouette against the endless ocean. Lila leaned her head on Minjun's shoulder. He's happy. So am I, Minjun said quietly. And he meant it. For the first time in his life, Minjun Kim was happy. Not satisfied, not powerful, not feared. Happy. That evening, after Elijah went to bed, Minjun sat on the porch steps. The stars were bright here, away from the city lights. The air was cool and clean. The only sounds were the distant waves and the crickets singing in the grass. Lila came outside and sat beside him, wrapping a blanket around both their shoulders. What are you thinking about? She asked. Minjun was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'm thinking about how different my life could have been if I hadn't found you that night, if I'd stayed in that empire. Would you have been happy? No, Minjun said. I'd have been powerful, but I'd have been dead inside. Lila took his hand. You're not dead now. No, Minjun agreed, squeezing her fingers. I'm alive, for the first time. They sat in silence, watching the stars. Then Minjun spoke again, his voice soft. I used to think strength meant never needing anyone, that love was weakness, that the only way to survive was to be alone. And now? Lila asked. Now I know the truth, Minjun said, turning to look at her. Love isn't weakness. It's the only thing strong enough to change a man like me. Lila's eyes shimmered with tears. You changed me, Minjun whispered. You and Elijah. You gave me a reason to be better. To be more than just power and fear. You did that yourself, Lila said gently. We just gave you a reason to try. Minjun pulled her close, wrapping both arms around her. They sat like that for a long time, two people who'd been broken and had somehow found a way to heal each other. 1 year later. The house had grown. Not in size, but in life. Photos covered the walls now. Elijah's soccer games, family trips to the mountains, birthday parties in the backyard. A baby's room had been added upstairs, painted soft yellow. Lila was pregnant again. A daughter this time. Minjun had cried when they found out. Cried like a child, his hands shaking as he held the ultrasound picture. A little girl, he'd whispered, his voice breaking. We're having a little girl. Yes, Lila had said, laughing through her own tears. We are. And Minjun had knelt down, pressing his face against Lila's belly, overwhelmed by the miracle of it. A second chance at being a father, a second chance at getting it right from the beginning, present day. It was a Sunday morning. The family sat around the breakfast table, Minjun, Lila, Elijah, now 10, and baby Maya, 6 months old, giggling in her high chair. Sun streamed through the windows. The radio played softly in the background. The smell of bacon and eggs filled the air. Elijah was telling a story about school, his hands waving dramatically. Maya was reaching for Cheerios, her face covered in mashed banana. Lila was laughing at something Elijah said. And Minjun sat at the head of the table watching all of them, his heart so full it hurt. This was his empire now. Not territory or power or fear, but love, family, home. And it was worth more than all the kingdoms in the world. Later that afternoon, Minjun found Elijah in the backyard, sitting under the oak tree. He looked serious, his young face thoughtful. Minjun sat down beside him. "What's on your mind?" Elijah was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Dad, I know you weren't always here." Minjun's chest tightened. "No, I wasn't. Mom told me you had a different life before." "I did. A dangerous one." "Yes." Elijah looked at him, his dark eyes, Minjun's eyes, filled with questions. "Why did you leave it?" Minjun thought carefully about his answer. Then he said, "Because I realized that being powerful doesn't mean anything if you're alone. And I'd spent my whole life alone. Until I met your mother. Until I found out about you." "So you gave it all up?" Elijah asked. "For us?" "No," Minjun said gently. "I didn't give it up. I traded it. For something better." "What?" Minjun smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "This. You. Your mom. Your sister. A life where I get to be a dad instead of a ghost." Elijah was quiet, processing. Then he leaned against his father's side, and Minjun wrapped an arm around him. "I'm glad you stayed," Elijah whispered. Minjun's throat tightened. "Me too, son. Me too." That night, after the kids were asleep, Minjun and Lila sat on the porch swing. The stars were out again. The ocean whispered in the distance. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't walked into that storm?" Lila asked softly. Minjun thought about it. Every day. And I think we would have found each other eventually, Minjun said, because some things are meant to be. Lila smiled. "You believe in fate now?" "I believe in second chances," Minjun corrected. "And I believe that love is stronger than fear." He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder. "You know what the best part is?" Minjun said quietly. "What?" "Every morning, I wake up and I get to choose this. Choose you, choose them, choose this life." "And you do?" Lila asked, though she knew the answer. "Every single day," Minjun whispered. "For the rest of my life." Lila closed her eyes, her hand resting over his heart. And in the quiet of that perfect moment, Minjun Kim, the man who'd once been a king of shadows, finally understood what it meant